The convoy rolled into the valley at 1,100 meters, and I watched her exhale, slow, the crosshairs already settled on the lead vehicle before the dust behind it had finished rising. "You're not taking that shot," Commander Hale Brannigan said behind us, low enough that the spotter beside her, a lanky corporal named Petty, flinched at the tone. 1,100 meters, crosswind gusting to 20, and you want the third man back in that convoy. Nobody makes that shot. Not you, not anybody in this program. Her name was Master Sergeant Wren Calloway, and she didn't answer him. She didn't even blink. She just kept breathing the way she'd been breathing for the last 2 hours we'd lain on that ridge, in through the nose, out slow through the mouth, her heart rate visible in the faint pulse of the rifle's reticle against the target if you knew how to watch for it. I'd been assigned to her as security element 3 days earlier, fresh off a rotation with a line unit, and I still didn't fully believe the reputation that traveled ahead of her. Brannigan clearly didn't either, not really, not down where belief lives instead of where paperwork says it should. I remembered the briefing 2 nights before the operation, a windowless room lit by a single hanging bulb, where an intelligence officer had laid out the target package and referred to her only as the asset attached from division. Nobody in that room except Petty and me had known her actual rank going in, and I'd watched 3 captains glance sideways at her the way men glance at something they can't quite place, deciding without being told that she must be support staff, an analyst maybe, someone's translator. She'd sat through the whole briefing without correcting a single assumption, taking notes in small, exact handwriting, and I understood later that this was simply how she moved through a room full of men who hadn't yet earned the right to know who she was. The hike up to the hide had taken 4 hours in full dark, and she'd set a pace that left 2 younger operators from Brannigan's own element breathing hard by the second hour. She never looked back to check on anyone struggling, never slowed to make a point of her own conditioning. She just moved, economical, silent on the loose shale where the rest of us kicked stones loose every 3rd step, and by the time we settled into position before first light, I understood that whatever reputation had traveled ahead of her, it had understated something. "Sir," Petty said carefully, ranging the convoy again through his own scope, "she's got the general in the second vehicle from what comm picked up. High-value target flanked by 2 decoy vehicles, same make, same escort pattern. If she waits for a clean look at the second vehicle, the convoy clears the pass before she gets it." "I know what she's got," Brannigan snapped. "I'm telling you both that wind is going to carry any round we send a full 1.5 meters off point of aim at that range. She fires, she misses, and every gun in that valley knows exactly where this hide is. I've read her file. I know what people say about her. I'm telling you I don't care what people say. Get on the horn and tell command we need air, not a rifle." I watched Calloway's hand move to the wind meter clipped near her elbow, unhurried, log the reading, do the math behind her eyes, and set the meter back down without a word. She'd built her whole career, from what little I knew of it, on not needing to explain herself to men who hadn't yet seen what she could do. 3 Tour, a program so quiet that half the operators in her own community didn't know her real name, a legend that traveled base to base in whispers because nobody with clearance to confirm it ever would. Brannigan had inherited her for this operation 2 days ago and treated her like an unwelcome variable ever since, a name on an attachment order rather than the reason 4 previous missions in this sector had gone right. I'd heard fragments of those missions from other operators before this deployment, always second-hand, always without her name attached. A hide in a different valley 18 months back where she'd held position for 31 hours without relief and still made a called shot at last light. A training cadre that quietly stopped teaching wind reads the old way after watching her rebuild the math from scratch using variables the manual didn't cover. None of it had a name until you served next to her long enough to piece it together, and Brannigan had been given exactly 2 days, not nearly enough time for a man who trusted paperwork over people. "Sir, with respect," I said, because somebody had to and I was too new to know better, "she hasn't missed a called shot in 11 months. That's in her file too. Brannigan's jaw worked. And I've watched good shooters get greedy on shots they had no business taking. I'm not losing this position because of a legend. Below us, the convoy slowed at a switchback, the lead vehicle's brake lights flaring red through the haze, and Calloway's whole body went still in a way I hadn't seen from her yet, not still like waiting, still like a held breath given a name. "Second vehicle's opening a gap," she said quietly. "They're going to bunch at the switchback for 8, maybe 10 seconds. That's my window." "Negative," Brannigan said. "Hold your fire, that's an order." She didn't argue. She didn't even look at him. She adjusted her elevation dial one click, then a second, factoring density, altitude, and the incline of the ridge beneath her rather than just the raw range. The kind of correction I later learned took most snipers years to trust doing by feel instead of by chart. Petty read her the wind again without being asked. The flags on a distant outpost antenna giving her a live reference nobody else in the valley had thought to use. She never fired without that confirmation. She wasn't going to start because a commander doubted her. "Sir," Petty tried again, "the general's exposed for maybe 6 more seconds." I said hold. Brannigan's voice cracked with something closer to fear than authority now, and I understood, watching him, that his order wasn't really about the wind or the range at all. It was about a woman he didn't understand being right in front of witnesses, about a program he'd never been read into producing results he couldn't explain in his after-action report. He needed the miracle to be someone else's, or better yet, not happen at all, so the order he'd given would still make sense. Calloway's finger settled against the trigger guard, not the trigger, waiting the way she'd waited 100 times before for the one variable that mattered more than any order shouted behind her. Beside her, Petty had gone very still himself, caught between the order he'd just heard and the read he trusted more, and I watched him make the same choice I was making without either of us saying a word. We would follow her lead over Brannigan's voice, because in 2 hours on that ridge she had never once been wrong about where the convoy would be a full 10 seconds before it got there. The convoy bunched at the switchback exactly as she'd read it would, 3 vehicles nose to tail, and for 2 full seconds the general's escort thinned enough to expose the door of the second vehicle as an aide climbed out to check something at the wheel well. "Belay the hold," came a new voice over the radio, calm, official, cutting through Brannigan's channel from far enough up the chain that even he straightened at the sound of it. "This is Colonel Ashworth, Division. Master Sergeant Calloway is cleared hot on my authority. Take your shot, cold bore." Brannigan spun toward the radio like it had bitten him. "Colonel, I have tactical control of this." "You have tactical control of a position, Commander, not of a called shot from the only operator in theater rated for it. Stand by." Calloway had already stopped listening to either of them. Her whole world had narrowed to the rise and fall of her own chest, the flags on that distant antenna, the vehicle door swinging wider, the aide stepping clear, and behind him, for the first time in 2 hours, a clean line to the man command had been hunting for 6 weeks. She let out half a breath and held the rest, the way she'd been trained to, the way I imagined she'd trained 100 younger shooters to since and squeezed. The rifle's report rolled down the valley half a second before the round arrived, that strange delay that always makes distant shots feel like they're happening to someone else. Through my own optic, I watched the round travel 1,100 meters against a shifting crosswind, correct for a drop measured in feet rather than inches, and take the general low in the chest as he half-turned to shout something at his driver. He was down before the sound of the shot finished echoing off the rock walls around us. The convoy erupted into chaos, vehicles scattering, gunners swinging their mounted weapons toward high ground with no idea which of a dozen ridgelands the shot had come from. Calloway didn't celebrate. She didn't even shift her cheek weld. She cycled the bolt, calm, methodical, already scanning for the secondary target Petty was calling out, a section leader trying to organize the scattering convoy into some kind of order. "Second target, 300 meters left of the strike point, standing on the running board," Petty said, voice tight but steady now, caught up in the rhythm she'd set rather than the fear the moment deserved. She found him, adjusted, fired again. This one closer, faster, less drama in the flight time, and the section leader went down before he'd finished raising his own weapon to point at the ridge. A third man broke from cover near the lead vehicle, running for the tree line with a radio pressed to his ear, and Calloway tracked him for a full 2 seconds before lowering her aim off him entirely, choosing not to spend a round on a man who no longer threatened the mission's objective. That restraint told me as much about her as either shot had. She wasn't hunting. She was finishing a problem precisely, and only as far as the problem required. The convoy's remaining escort broke for the tree line rather than stand and search for a shooter they had no hope of finding. And in less than 90 seconds, the operation that had haunted division planners for 6 weeks was finished. Not with an airstrike, not with a raid, but with 2 rounds fired by a woman a commander had ordered to hold. Brannigan stood frozen at the radio, the handset still loose in his fingers, staring down at Calloway's back like he was seeing an entirely different person than the one he'd argued with 30 seconds earlier. He'd built his objection on the certainty that no one could make that shot, and the valley below was now offering him proof, laid out plain and undeniable. That certainty had been the only thing wrong in that hide. Confirmed hit. Colonel Ashworth's voice came back over the radio, quieter now, almost reverent. Coldbore, that's your 4th division-level target this year. Command sends their compliments. Calloway finally lowered her rifle, cheek lifting off the stock, and looked back at Brannigan for the first time since he'd given the order she'd ignored. There was no triumph in her face, no satisfaction at having been proven right in front of him. Just the same steady patience she'd carried the whole 2 hours on that ridge, like she'd expected this outcome the entire time, and felt no particular need to enjoy it now that it had arrived. "Sergeant," Brannigan said, and had to stop and start again, his voice not quite steady. "You disobeyed a direct order." "I held until I had authorization, sir," she said. "Colonel Ashworth cleared me before I fired. I never fired without clearance." He knew that was true. We all did. It didn't make the moment any easier for him to stand inside. He looked down at the valley one more time, at the wreckage of an operation his own order would have let slip away, and something in his shoulders came down, not defeat exactly, but the particular weight of a man recalculating everything he thought he understood about the person standing next to him. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked, and it wasn't a challenge this time. It was almost the question of a much younger officer. 11 years, sir," she said. 11 months since my last miss on a called shot. You can check the file." "I read the file," Brannigan said. "I didn't believe it." "Most people don't, sir, until they watch it." He didn't say anything else for a long moment, just stood there while Petty quietly began breaking down the spotting scope, and I coiled the comm wire we'd need for the walk out. Then Brannigan did something I hadn't expected from a man who'd spent the last 2 hours certain she couldn't do what she'd just done. He came to attention, right there on the ridge with the dust of the operation still settling in the valley below, and held a salute longer than any regulation required, long enough that Petty stopped what he was doing to watch it happen. Calloway returned it, clean, unhurried, no flourish in it at all, and then went back to breaking down her position like the last 5 minutes had been an ordinary Tuesday, rather than the moment. A commander's certainty had been dismantled in front of 2 witnesses, and a radio full of division brass. We walked off that ridge 2 hours later, Brannigan a few steps behind where he usually positioned himself, no longer needing to lead from in front of a woman he decided to doubt. Halfway down the switchback trail, he fell into step beside Petty and asked, quietly, what other calls she'd made in this sector that hadn't made it into any report he'd been shown. Petty told him what he knew. Brannigan listened the whole way down without interrupting once, which was its own kind of answer. At the trucks, Colonel Ashworth was waiting in person, having flown in from division the moment the strike was confirmed, and he shook Calloway's hand in front of the entire element before he said a word to anyone else, including Brannigan. 4th Division target this year, he said again, loud enough for the whole convoy to hear it. Command wants to know how you read a crosswind nobody else trusted at that range. She told him, plainly, the way she might explain it to a student. No pride in it and no false modesty either. Just the mathematics of a life spent getting this exact thing right when everything depended on it. I've served under a dozen commanders since that deployment, and I've told this story to every young operator who ever mouthed off about a shot being impossible before they'd bothered to watch the person lining it up. Cold Bore never raised her voice on that ridge, never once needed to. She let the math and the wind and 11 years of quiet, patient work answer a commander's order the only way that was ever going to land. And by the time we reached the trucks, there wasn't a man in that column who doubted her again.